Hello and welcome, wherever you may be. This week I'll talk a little bit more about Gurdjieff's teaching, about knitting together the higher and the lower, about the Sephirot from Judaism, and how society becomes a museum. I opened up this well-known diagram. I haven't looked at it for a long time. It seemed confusing back then, but now it seems obvious what it is, and I will explain. This is the Sephirot. And what is its relationship to the exact knowledge that Gurdjieff had? It's quite simple, really. Here we have 10 elements, which is 9 plus 1. At the top you've got God, at the bottom you've got man. Therefore you have 2 does. In other words, it's an octave plus 1 element. Going down, it is the ray of creation, and going up, it's the return journey of man towards God. There are 3 triads for the 3 stories. Interestingly, and probably the most interesting feature, is that the bottom 2 point downwards, as if they are the work that we have to do in the lower 2 stories. But the third one changes. There's a ghost there where it had been. On one side you have 3 female elements, on the other side 3 male elements. It's very old, and I suppose generation after generation people decorated it. That's how human beings roll. And they've also added together all these interconnecting branches, which makes it seem quite confusing and is unnecessary. So it's quite straightforward, really. But I prefer the symbols from the East. They're much purer. The important thing is, as with Gurdjieff's conceptual models, even if you understand them, what difference does it make? Unless you actually have spiritual methods that you practice for hours every day, you can't apply any of these things. You can follow Gurdjieff in one way externally, by living like a courageous man, performing the labours of Hercules. That's one way. Does anybody live like that? But in terms of the real internal work, Gurdjieff gave it to almost nobody. And so these discussions people have about what the symbolism means never changes people because they have no practice. The 7 fundamental notes of the octave and the 2 intervals, the bearers of new directions, give altogether 9 links of a chain, 3 groups of 3 links each. The fundamental octaves are connected with the secondary or subordinate octaves in a certain definite way. Out of the subordinate octaves of the first order come the subordinate octaves of the second order. The construction can be compared to the construction of a tree. From the straight basic trunk there comes out boughs on all sides, which divide in their turn and pass into branches, becoming smaller and smaller, and finally covered with leaves. I was remembering On the Waterfront, a film from 1953, 10 years after the war, and noticing once again that America is and was a white ethno-state since its formation until 1960, which is clearly shown in all their media. But today other people are in charge, and although the levels of debt look very worrying, what they don't show is the wide-scale destruction of the original ethno-state, which will certainly spell a collapse and permanent decline. Britain also. It is different in Europe because the Middle Eastern people travelling to Europe still retain contact with their native lands, which are not far away by plane. whereas everybody who crosses the Atlantic loses everything. I think, therefore, in the future it is likely that Europe will reform in some ways, whereas the Anglo lands are likely to be finished. When I was out and about this weekend, I saw this, the lion and the unicorn, in an ancient church. The lion is England and the unicorn is apparently Scotland, and these emblems were created in about 1600 when the two countries joined together. Back then, it seems that the people and the emblems and the line of tradition were one. There was no space between them. There was no academia to separate you from the thing in itself. The people served the king, and the king served the lion, and there was no space between. Likewise, I happened to go to one of these yummy mummy eco restaurants, which are very popular with the soon-to-be-gone white people of Britain, especially the more educated one. In the car park, Range Rovers and Porsche SUVs. The venison sausages and expensive sauerkraut doesn't have prices on them. And this is what these people do instead of going to church these days. This is how they show their virtue and pretend that they aren't being wiped off the face of the planet. Many of their expensive cars are made with carbon fiber. Now, looking up carbon fiber, it turns out that it isn't really made of carbon. It says carbon fiber reinforced polymer or carbon fiber reinforced plastic are extremely strong and light reinforced plastics that contain carbon fiber, which can be used in aerospace, superstructures of ships, automotive, civil engineering, sports equipment, and an increasing number of consumer and technical applications. The binding polymer is often a thermoset resin such as epoxy, a structureless material, a bit like concrete. Things are poured together and set. They are impossible to recycle without burning at high temperature to make some kind of extruded secondary product. And that's what electric cars are made of, isn't it? To save the environment. And it feeds the vanity of the amnesiac Western people. On a more down-to-earth level, I got some keys cut in my local locksmith, a place where there is still some kind of sense of tradition and metalworking. But on the worktop, there are simply 5 different types of machines that fit different keys, and the keys are cut using the machines, so there's no more skill involved. If society has a meaning, it must be A, that it protects your race and your family, B, that it offers you the work of the being part of good old duty, and C, that it offers you heaven and a path upwards. In Japan, the Shinto shrines for ancestor worship of the first 2 stories sit right alongside the Buddhist shrines of the 3rd story. It's hard for me to really describe this sense that I have always had in this country, that everything is a museum, and that people don't really feel anything anymore. They don't have claws, and they don't sharpen their teeth, they don't act, and they don't fight, and they don't suffer. It's like being born in the Merry Celeste where everybody's fucking happy. They're happy when they're happy when they're miserable, and they're all saving the fucking world. What the hell happened? It seems to me that a man who does a complicated job learns from that 3-centered work something, and there is something alive in the illumination of that small space of his work. Any intellectual ideas must be related to the work that is done, and everything else is pure bullshit. Only things that are related to real, intense, actual, skilled work are meaningful. Everything else is a voyeuristic, Sawyer flat white. I wanted to mention certain spiritual ideas that have become popular that I start to really question. For instance, the idea of awakening. This idea of awakening is there's some sort of secret place that you have to cross and then suddenly everything's fixed for you. But is the real path like that? At what point are you going to confront yourself and the lies of this world? At what point are you going to learn anything real? What is the connection between your spiritual path and the real hard work of the earth? What is the connection? Are we just going to awaken? All these ideas come from, you know where they come from, don't you? What people want, what the false self wants, is something to keep it busy that sounds good, but never actually goes anywhere. Anything that actually goes anywhere, anything that actually costs them, they fight it, they destroy it. That is just why I advise you to be very careful not to make enemies among them, and by that means to make a lot of trouble for yourself and in the carrying out of your affairs. So our dear Hussein, the very simius of my advice to you is this, that if you should indeed have to exist among the beings of that planet Earth, then you must never tell the truth to their face. Let fate spare you this. Any kind of truth makes them extremely indignant, and their animosity towards others almost always begins with indignation. To such terrestrial types you must always say to their face such things as may tickle those consequences of the properties of the organ kunda buffer unfailingly crystallized in them, in which I have already enumerated, namely, their envy, their pride, their self-love, their vanity, their lying, and so on. If one of them is as stupid as a cork, say that he has the mind of Pythagoras. Suppose his conduct in some business is obviously lunatic. Tell him that even the great cunning fellow Lucifer couldn't have done better. Suppose that in his external appearance you see signs that he has a number of terrestrial diseases from which he is progressively rotting day by day. Then, with an expression of astonishment on your face, ask him, "Do please tell me what is your secret for always looking like a youth in his prime?" And so forth. Only remember one thing, never tell the truth. And I wondered to myself how such beautiful and lovely people as the human beings who always tell you they're beautiful and lovely and are always happy and smile, how they could live on a planet that looks like this and make it almost impossible to escape. If a man were to feel all the contradictions in him, he would feel what he really is. He would feel that he is mad. It is not pleasant for anyone to feel that he is mad. Moreover, a thought such as this deprives a man of self-confidence, weakens his energy, deprives him of his self-respect. A man cannot destroy these contradictions, but if buffers are created in him, he can cease to feel them. Imitating others in their opinions and actions and words, a man involuntarily creates similar buffers in himself. Buffers make a man's life more easy. Buffers are appliances by means of which a man can always be in the right. Buffers help a man not to feel his conscience. A sewing machine is a very interesting device because it, in reality, and not theoretically or metaphorically, it, in reality, knits together heaven and earth, doesn't it? It actually makes that work. How does it do it? And because it works in reality, it's something that can be studied very closely. I'll just point out a few things. The first is timing. The second is how many times does the male element cross the threshold? And the third thing is that this structure is created with a male and a female element and something else also. But as Gurdjieff says, to fully understand what an element is, you have to see which force is travelling through it. And whilst contemplating these things this weekend, I happened to do some old Qigong forms, and I was quite shocked to see how they actually function. Christianity has many octaves, and it has many octaves because the people who designed it, and it must have been many thousands of years ago, they actually knew things. Can you imagine? The same for the Jewish Sephirot. Those people must have lived such a long time ago. And the full working of a sewing machine cannot be understood from the plane. It is three-dimensional. The line of forces adopts a three-dimensional aspect. If the microcosmos, or man, is a three-dimensional body, then the tritocosmos, organic life on Earth, is a four-dimensional body. The Earth has 5 dimensions and the Sun 6. The usual scientific view takes men as a three-dimensional body. It takes organic life on Earth as a whole more as a phenomenon than a three-dimensional body. The inexactitude of this view becomes evident if we try to conceive the existence of one cosmos within the other, that is, of a lower cosmos in a higher, of a smaller cosmos in a greater, such as for instance the existence of man in organic life, or in relation to organic life. In this case, organic life must be inevitably taken in time. Existence in time is an extension along the 4th dimension. Neither can the Earth be regarded as a three-dimensional body. It would be three-dimensional if it were stationary. Its motion around its axis makes man a 5-dimensional being, whereas its motion around the Sun makes the Earth itself 4-dimensional. The Earth is not a sphere but a spiral encircling the Sun, and the Sun is not a sphere but a kind of spindle inside this spiral. The spiral and the spindle, taken together, must have a lateral motion in the next cosmos. But what results from this motion we cannot know, for we know neither the nature nor the direction of the motion. Well, I don't understand much of that. But at the rate that I'm peeling open ancient wisdom, I suppose one day I probably shall. Recently I think more and more about how to rapidly leave this fucking place. Often I have the idea that if something from the world is given to you, you should smile and be polite. But anyway, I'm no saint either.